All right, hello everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jenny, and the only job I have to do is to introduce our three speakers, plus give a whole lot of housekeeping, which you've probably already heard today. But before we do that, I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal traditional owners of the land from across Australia and the surrounding seas, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water, culture and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present. We honour your local community traditions for caring for archives and culture through country, through songs and stories. Okay, there should be a prize for people that can remember what the messages are going to be, because we've heard them so many times. Please don't forget to use hand sanitizer. Thank you to all our sponsors, in particular the gold sponsor, the National Archives of Australia. Don't forget to go and visit the exhibitors, both ones present and those online. Don't forget to take everything with you. And don't forget to register for the UNESCO Forum by midnight tonight if you're planning to join Adrian Cunningham on Friday. Your hashtag, here we are 2022, if you like posting social media. And a reminder to go and have a look at the publications that are on sale at the ASA stand. Okay, our three speakers are no surprises in the school archive world. They've all done great things with their archives and they're going to share what they know with us today. So we've got Ros Malone, who's archivist from Bunbury Cathedral Grammar School in Western Australia. We've got Paul Mashura, who's the archivist from Scotch College, Melbourne, and Kate Pulford, the college archivist from Prince Alfred College in Adelaide. And they're all going to talk about digital records, which we know is a bugbear for those of us that work in schools for lots of reasons. Whether it's money that we don't have that we'd like to have, whether it's expertise we would love to have that we don't quite have because we work on our own. And so these three practitioners are going to give us some help. They're going to give us some of their wisdom. And hopefully at the end, your brains have so fired up that you'll be able to ask them lots of questions, because we're going to have a panel discussion for about 20 minutes right at the end. So please keep your questions coming. So first of all, I'd like Ros to come up, who's going to present a paper on records retention management, particularly with school student records. Is that right?
Not particularly, but
with digital records.
Thank you, Jenny. Hello, everyone. It's good to see so many school archivists in one place. And today, as you see from the title of my presentation, we're going to talk about retention management in the school archive. And please let me know if you can't hear me as we are beginning. So retention and disposal for digital school records is a rising concern for all schools, government and non-government. And there have been a number of changes in recent years. Environments for school records retention and disposal have been influenced by a number of factors in only the past few years, changing both aspiration and practice for school archivists. Although often given as the only factor driving change for the long-term retention of the school record, and by association in the school archive, the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse is one of many drivers, with other pressures including legislative and regulatory change for non-government schools, a developing environment of enforcing or defending legal rights, and a change in human rights perceptions and associated charters. The clear intention of the wide-ranging Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse was to examine and report on the ways in which institutions across Australia, including non-government schools, responded to incidents and allegations of child sexual abuse. The clear findings were in many ways damning for schools, exposing cultures of avoidance, deliberate delay, excessive redaction, unauthorised records destruction, and records neglect. In general, the positive outcome of these findings has been improved records retention and disposal practice for the majority of both government and non-government schools. The current environment for records retention and disposal has seen developments such as photographs and other archival material emerge as evidence, encouraging long-term retention for images and other media to support both investigation and protection. The development and strengthening of the RRDS2 by the ASA, together with respected consultant Judith Ellis, and improved protocols for the release of information held in the school archive, especially student records. In particular, the proliferation of digital school records continues to develop school archives practice in terms of the long-term retention of information now required for permanent retention. Risk for non-government and other schools has increased significantly in recent years, not least of all due to some major changes to both regulation and legislation for school records, with the central recommendation of the Royal Commission being to tie records compliance with school re-registration. On page 112 of Volume 8, Record Keeping and Information Sharing, the specific use of existing regulatory frameworks, such as school registration, is recommended to monitor and enforce records and record keeping. This mechanism has been adopted by the Western Australian Government, with records requirements a larger part of the re-registration process from January 2020. Legislative changes recommended by the Royal Commission include removing the limitation period for survivors of childhood sexual abuse to bring claims, known as the Statute of Limitations. A number of states and territories have made this legislative change, including Queensland, Western Australia, Tasmania, and as I recently learned, New South Wales. With the lifting of the Statute of Limitations, claims may be brought at any time by a survivor of abuse, meaning that a range of school records may now be required for very long-term retention. Assessing and communicating the value of record keeping and archives, meaning the long-term retention of such records, which are likely to protect schools, students, and staff over time, has become an increasing part of the role of retention management. Archivists are the natural retention managers for non-government schools, and this area of retention management, which may be termed as protective record keeping, may include practices such as defensible note-taking. Note-taking records at schools today corresponds with a reality that duty holders may face a penalty if they fail to comply with obligations to keep a record of suspected or actual child abuse, and requires creating and keeping notes more often than not today in digital form. Some strategies for ensuring complete notes include online forms with mandatory fields. Part of the reporting obligations of teachers and other school staff, a good note-taking record should describe what, when, and who, be complete, accurate, and reliable, reflect the purpose of creation, provide enough detail to suit the context, and be as close to contemporaneous as possible. Notes should not be open to alteration after creation, and they become valuable archives to be retrieved as part of future inquiries. These developing areas of school record-keeping practice with the potential to protect both students and staff are likely to enhance our ability to help those who may have been abused, to mitigate risks such as the successful prosecution of staff for not keeping a record, which I've referenced there from Trinity College in Perth, and to support the organisation to meet its changing obligations. Growing areas of concern for school records include social media incident records and the concept of valid consent for both the collection and retention of personal information. And at the time when I wrote this talk, nothing had been heard of Optus, and now we all know what happens with the collection and retention of some personal information. And valid consent is also required for the use of school systems and the use of school archives online. Defence from legal claims related to social media misuse is a developing issue for schools across the world, as well as in Australia. The law changes quickly in this area and sits within the school's duty of care. Once a school becomes aware of a social media incident, it now has a responsibility to take action. Part of this action is keeping a record of the incident, with failure to keep a record being raised in court proceedings and difficulty convincing a court that the school did not know of the incident, a common scenario. As with other matters relating to school records, significance is a major factor. Large, obvious, or very serious social media incidents that the school becomes aware of, or repeated or reported incidents, should be recorded and retained by the school. Records of significant social media incidents that should be retained by the school include social media policy and any changes to policy, with record keeping included in this policy, acceptable use policies and any changes to these policies, a record of large, obvious, or very serious repeated and reported social media incidents that the school becomes aware of, and documentation of reliable third-hand information around such incidents. Consent can be defined as permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. Schools are complex legal and risk environments, and records relating to valid consent are critical risk management records. Valid consent records include both records of consent and evidence of fully informed, explicit provision of information before consent. In terms of protective record keeping, consent records must show informed consent, the provision of fully informed, explicit provision of information to the consenter. This includes keeping a record of the steps taken to obtain informed consent. Structuring consent records in this way allows the school to have a record of both student and parent acknowledgement that certain risks exist, and all schools will be aware of the kind of risks I'm talking about, especially around co-curricular activities, and that these risks have been explained to them fully before consent. Valid consent is enabled by ensuring that the consenter has the capacity to consent, has consented voluntarily, has been adequately informed of the circumstances, has understood the consequences, and has been provided with current and specific consent. In this context, both lapsed consent and blanket consent are risks for the school. It is also important to retain records to show that the school has provided reminders to update details as they change, such as health and medical information. A further risk is the management of consent records within third-party platforms, a very common scenario at schools today. Because it is common for records to be overwritten periodically on third-party platforms, there are risks to the medium and long-term retention of any evidence of informed consent. Records kept in relation to valid consent should be current, written, that is text-based, hard copy or digital, and specific. A further outcome for schools as part of the Royal Commission is the concept of moral ownership of records kept, which relate to the life of a child while in the care of any organisation outside of the home. This concept is particularly resonant for schools with boarding facilities and related offerings, and is growing in value for young people already in out-of-home care, such as foster care, who may also be students at a boarding school. Moral ownership, as put forward by the Royal Commission, works together with the rising ideals of the record-keeping rights of the child, as led by Monash University in 2017. Participatory record keeping, the right to amend, and records repatriation rights implying cultural ownership are all developing human rights concepts which may influence the value and importance of school records, how organisations manage those records, and how they facilitate access. Digital records are vulnerable records. They can be lost in many ways. A lost record can be simply defined as one that can no longer be accessed or retrieved, meaning that a cycle of not keeping the record of the life of a child at an organisation is repeated. Long-term retention challenges for the digital school record include format and systems obsolescence, inadequately mapped migration leading to large or small-scale information loss, and many of you would have been through problems with migration. Inadequate management of evidential records within large, uncontrolled digital systems, various roles and responsibilities, often without oversight for records capture and maintenance across even a single organisation, and the doubtful long-term reliability of third-party platform providers. Improved retention management for digital school records includes digital preservation actions that many archivists will be familiar with, including, and thank you to the State Library of New South Wales. I've used their list and put it in context for our work. Using sustainable file formats in the school archive, this is likely to be PDFA. Using detailed and standardized metadata, a reflection of full arrangement and description, but applied to digital objects. Replication, for very long-term school records, consider duplication and multiple backups. Attention to obsolescent systems and software, and planned and managed migration to new platforms. The emulation of legacy systems, for example, archived but accessible versions of former school databases, and proactive and continuous management and strategy. And this is where I put out the call to school archivists to be proactive, which can include simple strategies such as creating PDF reports from third-party digital platforms which hold permanent retention school records, such as attendance, health and welfare, and boarding student management records, which can then be maintained to archival standards within school systems. So what are the directions after all of this information for school records practice? School records practice, including retention management and school archives, has changed direction. the central criticism for non-government schools from the Royal Commission was that the way in which many schools responded to allegations and incidents of child sexual abuse was unacceptable. Better practice in recent years has involved both welcome to inquirers and open discussion, and improved access through facilitation for inquiries and for survivors of abuse. School archivists, as the gatekeepers of the historical record, now need to be aware of the rights of both children and adults who may be abuse survivors, and need to be able to communicate those rights to those who make inquiries, seeking material from the school collection. Rapidly increasing risk environments for schools and the fragile nature of digital records places calls upon school archivists to proactively manage those records, to enable their long-term retention and protection from loss. Digital preservation actions such as the use of sustainable file formats, standardized metadata, replication, managed and planned migration, and legacy system emulation are all part of powerful retention management practice for digital school records. Deliberate strategies such as the proactive capture and management of records of suspected or actual abuse, such as defensible note-taking records, an understanding of digital systems and a strong voice for the records held on those systems, and interventions to better capture and manage the digital records embedded in current obligations for schools are all changing and developing school archives practice. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, have we got any questions? We've been given a lot to think about and a lot to put in process, and probably for some of us it's a little daunting. Yep.
Hi, I'm Louise. I'm really interested in, so from outside the school archives community, things look really complex. Like, it's quite interesting to get a sense of the responsibility you shoulder. So I'm a parent of a 12-year-old in an independent school, and I know their record keeping consists of a shed. And I teach students at Charles Sturt, and I teach lots of teacher librarians who are landed with the job of looking after the archives, and they enrol in the archives subjects. And it's really interesting because this is a foreign landscape to some of them, quite deeply foreign. So one of my questions to you is, some of the detail that Kate and Paul have presented is, what's your value proposition? Like, your community, for those of us from the outside, it's quite hard to understand the place of records and archives. You look so handsomely resourced. So, and it's like, you know, like, I'm sure council archivists amongst us would be going, oh my God, they can like make a display and have a museum.
Yeah.
It seems like wealthy from the outside. And I'm sure that's a kind of cultural phenomenon that you have to manage a lot, is you're kind of in the haves, where there's other parts of the archive community who are in the have-nots. So I'm just wondering if I can ask that rather awkward question, you know, because I'm sure the conversation looks different inside your community than outside it.
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that. Thanks, Louise. And it's interesting you say I had a little bit of experience in teaching the archival management course in Adelaide myself, so I understand that side of it. But I think what we do as archivists is we're essentially also selling the school. So we're trying to historicise and make the school look particularly valued and based in heritage. But also for that reason, if we're lucky enough to have a support from executive, we are hopefully supported to do some of the programming. But having said that, I have a pretty small budget, but I'm just starting to lay the foundation of what I need to do, and then I'm going to be able to just use some documentation to leverage. We need this amount of money, or we need this amount of money to do this and that. But it's a bit of smoke and mirrors, I think. I think Paul's examples of his exhibition spaces are really fantastic. Mine are really not. They haven't really been extended since I've been in the role, because I've been building the role. I haven't really had time to do anything with the exhibition spaces except that new piece that I showed, which was a bit of a quick fix, actually. So at the same time, it meant that we could look at the digitisation process and what needs to be done for digitisation. But I'm not sure if that's answering that properly. Do you want to add, Paul? Or Ros?
Just to give an example, my budget's also fairly small too. There are schools like ours that I have seen. I visited a lot of schools and seen what they've got. There was one school where its entire archives were things stored on the floor in the corner of one room. There's another one where the student records and what comprises or stands for the entire archives is stored in one room about 8 feet by 8 feet. So they do all vary in terms of resourcing that we get. The smoke and mirrors comment's very apt. We do need to make things look a lot better than perhaps they are, but a very big part of it is the past students of the school are attracted to it. There's a lot of researchers that come to it. A lot of it's not as neat and as nice as we like, but it's a gradual process. In the case of my facilities, I spoke about the 2 old houses. I still have the 2 houses, but they're being stuck together. I've got a new compactus area built on the back. A lot of fundraising was done from the old boys to make that possible.
And I'll very briefly say, from the records point of view, the value proposition has to be sold to the school. Protective record keeping is the way to sell it to the school, and risk management. And my school, that has caused them, although we're a low-risk school, we have no real reason to do this. It's a matter of planning and future-proofing. It's just the way they see the business environment for non-government schools. So it's a business decision. You sell it as such, and they will be investing more time and more resources into this next year. So I was able to successfully put that to them, and that is a major part of the role of the school archivist, with what Paul and Kate do, and with the focus of my work that I've delivered today. You must sell it to your school.
And you're currently advocating within the school for the archive as well. You're the gatekeeper, the custodian, the advocate. You're everything. Otherwise, it really will just be just a dusty shed. And in my case, our storage is at literally capacity, with, potentially 50, 100 years more of records being kept over time. I really have nowhere to put anything. So I'm currently sort of lobbying for more storage, both digital and, virtual.
So it looks good, Louise, but there's a lot of work behind it.
But it's
And we present it well, and every school archivist would know what we mean.
One more question, and that's, we're going to have to call it quits.
I just have a quick question, or it's actually a statement in response to that question as well. One of our jobs is actually to document the history of education in Australia, and I really like the fact that Paul had that the student work, and I think that's one of our jobs, and how children play and played over the years, and I think that's something that is probably not valued as much, but I think in terms of actually, it's something we're looking at my school, is actually looking at the students' work over time, over, in your case, 150 years. I mean, it is a really valuable asset to education, I do believe.
It's good, and at the moment it's excellent to be able to do things like we made a COVID-19 digital time capsule, which captures that, exactly what you say, but in the moment of COVID-19, to be able to look back on it.
Okay, well, I'd like you to thank our 3 speakers. Thank you to Ros, Kate and Paul. pass them along.